Hey everyone, this is Lucid. Welcome back to another episode in our guide series. In this episode, we are going to be talking not about a phase of the game, but about diplomacy in general. And the reason I really wanted to talk about this was it came up in our group discussion on the Micklin series, and people were talking about different expectations they had and about betrayal and whether people were getting salty, and I thought it would be really good to do a video on diplomacy with things. There's a few things I want to share. One of the reasons why people get upset in Dominions is because they don't really understand the game they're playing. And I'll explain what I mean by that, but I think that's one of the main reasons why people get upset. They feel kind of betrayed and hurt and cheated. And so that's one of the things I want to talk about. The other is, what are some common standards in diplomacy within this game? And finally, I just want to talk about good diplomacy and how to do it. With that, we're going to actually be using this game. It was a Scaleria game I was in a while ago, and I'm just going to use that as a map in context for talking about diplomacy. So with that, I think we're going to start with this first part about, and this gets to why people get salty. I think people get salty when they feel cheated or hurt, and a lot of that comes from not knowing the game we're playing. So what game are we playing? Well, first let's start with what game we're not playing. Dominion's multiplayer is not a game of long-term alliances. This is not Lord of the Rings or some other saga where it's good versus evil, and all of the different factions of good, the elves, the dwarves, and the humans, they form an alliance after much negotiation, and they hold hands as they ride off into the sunset fighting the evil axis of enemy powers. And it's not a game of long-term alliances where there's, some players that are going to be your friends for forever and others that are going to be your enemies for forever. That's just not the game. Nobody actually thinks it's like that, but I think a lot of people emotionally interpret the game that way. And that's why people end up getting so hurt when somebody ends a nap with them, for example. And not even breaking it, just saying, okay, we had a nap 3, I'm going to end that now, so in 3 turns from now it goes back to the default alliance. Okay, if it's not a game of long-term alliances, what game is it that we're playing? Well, it's a bit like Survivor, that bad TV show, or the board game Diplomacy. And it's like those because you need other people to survive in the present, but ultimately they're kind of all your enemies in the end. It is a game where, based on the game state, perceived strengths and weaknesses between different players, players are going to form alliances to force other players out of the game and to strengthen their position in the game. So that's the game we're playing. The alliances, though, they're a bit like love, and that, it's required for this madness to continue. But it's always going to end in death or tears. Think about that. Every alliance you make is going to end in either you or the player you're allied with dying, or in the alliance getting broken, right? So that's the death or the tears. So these things are not long-term. They're strategic alliances to get you through the present state of the game and to hopefully help balance out the game state or to get the game state more in your favor. So that is what alliances are for. And then there's a joke that somebody told me about the board game Diplomacy, which is pretty relevant here. But it's necessary to get behind someone in order to stab them in the back. And that's a much more cynical way to look at alliances, where eventually somebody will end it. The alliance will always be ended, but in order for an alliance to be ended, you have to form it in the first place, right? So that's the get behind them. Anyway, that's the game. Unlike the board game of Diplomacy, it is not only your diplomatic skills which will determine your fate, but it's also your strength as a tactician and as a general, and based on the accumulated strength of your nation to that point. So even if kind of diplomacy fails, you can make up for that with kind of cunning tactics and otherwise military gameplay. But in the end, this is a game where there can be only one. If you think about the game in this way, where it is not a game of long-term alliances, in fact, it's a game of very quickly shifting alliances. In fact, the better the players are at the game that are in your current multiplayer game, the better the players are, the more quickly they will turn on each other to keep the game state balanced. In fact, in the perfect game, the game would never end because players would keep stabbing the game leader in the back to knock them down, and the game would just go on for forever. Now, there's several reasons why that doesn't happen, even in a game with really good players. But that is an important context to think about it. It's not, most of the time, it's not personal at all if somebody's going to attack you. They think it's in their best interest, either to balance out the game state or to help them get ahead. And if you understand that, and that is the game they should be playing, you shouldn't be hurt when that happens to you. And furthermore, if you think about it in that way, it's much easier to approach them with an argument about how they might have thought about it wrong, or how there may be a different option that they could pursue, which would be in their better interest. But we'll talk about a lot more of that at the end of this video, with some of the tips for kind of being quote-unquote good at diplomacy. But I hope that attacks some of the saltiness that you see in games, because it's really unfortunate. I think there are a lot of good players that do not like the diplomacy, and it's because of either people getting ganged up on or feeling kind of hurt when they get attacked or alliances ended. And I think that there's a lot of people who have a really good understanding of the tactical level of the game, but they don't necessarily understand the diplomatic level of the game. And if you understand it and you accept it, it's actually a really fun part of the game to play. So anyway, I hope that helps. And I put this part at the beginning of the video because if anybody watches it, or somebody's getting kind of butthurt in a game, maybe you can send them here and then they can watch this first part and just be like, okay, that kind of calms my nerves a little bit. Anyway, okay, on to the next part. I want to talk about etiquette and kind of common practices. And so in general, this is an interesting... Diplomacy is interesting in Dominions because it's not really built into the game at all. Meaning you cannot really sign any agreements. The devs didn't put any features really in the game except you can send resources to each other and you can talk. So all of the diplomacy is just human-human interaction, which means that you can say one thing and do another. You can form any kind of agreement the other person will agree to. So in that sense, when I'm talking about what are the standards, this is more just a common lingo so that people can have a shared understanding of certain things. But you can do anything. So this is not the only thing you can do. You can come up with almost any type of agreement the other person will agree to. But I'm just going to talk about the standards in multiplayer, so when you hop into a multiplayer game and people are talking, you know what they're talking about. The most common diplomatic tool in Dominions is a non-aggression pact, or a NAP, N-A-P. And it normally is a NAP 1 or a NAP 2 or a NAP 3. And sometimes people will want to do longer NAPs. I don't really ever do them, but anyway. So those are NAPs. What is a NAP 1? What is a NAP 2? What is a NAP 3? This is a source of a fair amount of confusion because the turn you send it is a different turn than the turn it's received, and which one means what. So I'm going to clarify, I hope, what can be a baseline understanding for people as we kind of do non-aggression pacts. What is a NAP 0? A non-aggression pact 0. Nobody ever does one of these. I've never seen one in a game, and it's because it would be stupid to do a NAP 0, because a NAP 0 would mean that the same turn I'm ending my non-aggression pact with you is also the turn I'm attacking you. So I would send you a notice saying, I'm attacking you at the same turn as I'm attacking you. So that wouldn't be helpful at all. So if that's a NAP 0, then what would it... So NAP 0 is not really a thing. A NAP 1 means I'm going to tell you I'm going to attack you, and on the next turn, I do attack you. Right? So if I tell you I'm attacking you on turn 30, you get it on turn 31. But I haven't attacked you because I sent you the message on part of my turn 30. I just sent you the message. Turn 31, you get the message. But on my turn 31, I may choose to attack you. Right? And so that would mean on your turn 32, you might get attacked. So you would have turn 31 to prepare for turn 32 where I'm attacking you. So that is a NAP 1. Now what is a NAP 3? Because NAP 3 is kind of the most common. A nap 3 is, let's do the same example. On turn 30, I send you a message saying, I'm ending our nap. Now, on turn 31, you get that message. That means you have 3 turns to prepare, including your current turn, right? So you prepare on turn 31, you prepare on turn 32, you prepare on turn 33, and on turn 34, the attack can come, right? From the player that's ending the nap, from their perspective, turn 30, they send it, right? They have 3 turns until they can send the attack orders. So they can't send it on turn 31, they can't send it on turn 32, but on turn 33, they can send the attack orders. And that means on turn 34, the armies can arrive. Now, that is the baseline of what a non-aggression pact is. In terms of what are the turn timings and stuff, what does a nap 3 actually means. But because a lot of people don't know, or people may have various interpretations, one of the great things you can do this at any time. You can do this when you're setting up the nap. Sometimes that's nice. But most of the time you can also do it when you're ending it, is you say, I am ending our nap per our agreement. It was a nap 3. That means we have 3 turns. So nobody can issue attack orders until on turn 33, which means they will be, any attacks will be actually occurring on turn 34. And putting that kind of clarification on the ending message is going to prevent a lot of people from getting upset or from having misinterpretations on what your agreement meant. Now, ending these naps well is actually a really important part of diplomacy too, because you remember, ending, and if you understand what the game is, ending a non-aggression pact is not saying you dislike the other player or anything like that, right? It's just saying the game state has shifted such that I need to no longer have this non-aggression pact. And you also remember what I said, with really good players, you would constantly be shifting so much that you keep knocking people out of the game leader spot. If you're doing that and diplomatic relations are going to be shifting really quickly, then you don't want to piss people off when you end your nap with them, because you may need to nap with them again in the future, right? This is not a, good versus evil or anything like that. This is shifting diplomatic alliances to keep the game state even. So because of that, don't piss people off when you end your nap. Be civil, and, you can usually do it in some kind of funny way. But be very clear about what it means when the nap is ending, so that y'all don't have a misinterpretation and people don't get their feelings hurt. So I think that's about it for the standards on a nap. Now, there's other questions that people ask, like, what does a nap mean? Does it mean, for example, that nobody can steal my global? The short answer for that is no, it does not mean you can't fight over globals, because again, you're not an ally, right? You're not an ally in the sense of y'all are going to win the game if it's only the 2 of you left. No, you still have to fight. And you're fighting over globals. So the non-aggression pact is just so that you can turn your militaries to other endeavors rather than fighting each other. But a non-aggression pact, unless it specifically says so, does not prevent fighting over globals. So if you have a nap and then a few turns later somebody puts up Mother Oak and then you were planning on casting it, so you wait a few more and then you overcast it, that's not a violation of the nap. It's not a violation of the nap if they had Mother Oak up when you signed the nap. Globals are not covered in non-aggression pacts. If you want them to be covered, you would need to state that. And then, good luck. It's not common for people to do it. I would never sign a nap where people don't ask me to fight over globals. It's not a reasonable thing to request of people most of the time. You can do it. You can do anything you want to in Dominions. There's no restraints, but just understand that most of the time, players are going to want whatever global they're going to get. Now, you can say, if you take my global from me, I'm going to go to war with you. Like, that's a diplomatic tool you can do. But it is not within the bounds of a normal nap according to the normal Dominions community. So anyway, that's just so you know. But another question people ask sometimes is, if somebody ends a nap with me, does that mean I'm going to get attacked right as soon as the nap is over? And 90% of the time, just in practice, the answer is yes. Normally, people don't end a nap with you until they know they want to attack you. So 90% of the time, the answer is yes. However, there are circumstances where people just need flexibility so that they can attack you. Like if if you're close to a throne victory, you may not be the person they want to target, but they want to end a nap with you just so that in the case that the game state does start getting unbalanced, that they can react quickly and stop a throne victory. So anyway, that is non-aggression pacts. The final thing I want to talk about, and this is more for etiquette, is what is the difference between in-game anger and then real-life anger? And this may seem kind of subtle, but if a nation gets betrayed, it is totally reasonable for the nation to seek retribution, and that can be a good deterrent from people kind of frivolously attacking you, because otherwise people might say, oh, well, I'll just take this province for here and there, and, he's a nice guy, he'll just forget about it, and we'll just smooth it over in diplomacy. And yeah, you can totally do that, but, if people are picking away at you all the time and taking advantage of you, that's not good, right? So, being a bit vengeful can be a good diplomatic tool, within measure. What is usually not a good diplomatic tool, and what is not fun for anybody playing the game, and it's not helpful, is when people get legitimately tilted and really upset. It doesn't usually, in any time I've seen, actually help them with diplomacy. Normally it just makes people want to kind of kill them and get them out of the game, or just not listen to anything they're saying, more likely. Getting really angry at somebody and feeling betrayed usually does not help, and it pisses people off. Now, that being said, the other thing I want to say is there's not much justification for real anger. And the reason is because, first of all, if somebody ends their non-aggression pact with you per the terms, they haven't done anything for you to be upset about, right? They're just reverting to the base state of the game where they can choose to attack you if they want, and they're doing it according to the terms of your agreement. Now, if somebody breaks their nap, meaning they had a nap 3 with you and they don't tell you and they just attack you, now you might say, okay, now that's a reason to get really upset. And sure, I would be a little bit frustrated and upset, but it's not a reason to actually get angry in the game. I mean, it's not a reason to get furious and irrational in the game. And it's not a reason to really feel hurt. Like, you can seek revenge in the game and all of those things, but you have to remember, this is a risk that you took. If you chose to trust somebody, you chose to take a calculated risk and trust them. There's no guarantees that says that they were going to hold up their end of the deal, right? It's a risk that you took, and maybe you fell into kind of a con with them, where it was a risk you shouldn't have taken, but you did. So that's on you. Now you can seek vengeance so that people don't cheat you in the future. But at its core, it was a decision you made and you bear the consequences. So hopefully that's something to kind of temper you if you're getting really upset with getting stabbed in the back. The other thing I want to talk about in terms of, and this is we're going to kind of blend seamlessly here into strategy in terms of what's good diplo, what's bad, but it's going to blend in a little bit with ethics and etiquette, is should you lie in diplomacy? The short answer is not often. If your word isn't trusted, if people can't trust that you'll follow up with the nap, which is a form of lying, like if you break a nap, you're losing a lot. So you better be gambling to win if you do that move. If people can't trust you, you're going to have a very difficult time doing anything in the future. Pretty risky to totally lose trust. Actually, outright lying is usually a bad idea. But that said, diplomacy in the game is usually based on a mixture of truth and lies. To really understand when we should tell the truth and when we should lie, we need to talk a bit more about what the objectives of diplomacy are. The thing with diplomacy is it's based on relative truths. We want to make arguments to the other player based on what is true to that player, and we want to influence what they're going to do. So what do I mean by that? Diplomacy is not really about outright lying to people so that where you're misbetraying your intentions, like you're promising to do things you know you're not going to do. Instead, what it's about is altering the other person's perception of the game state. And part of that game state can involve what your intentions are, so that it is in their best interest to do something that they otherwise might not have done, which is you perceive in the best interest of either the game state at large or your personal best interest. We can talk about some examples of that in this particular Scalaria game. In this particular game, I'm at war with Satis, and I'm kind of eating Satis alive right now. I've already kind of eaten Falegra, who is down here, but Ulm took a bunch of the Falegran lands, and Ulm and I are kind of at peace. I am reaching this point with Scaleria where you're starting to spiral out of control, and it's going to take like a very strong coalition to kill Scaleria. But my neighbors over here, they're fighting. We've got Bandarlog fighting over Marignon's capital, but Ashdod had wanted this capital, and so Ashdod and Bandarlog are going to fight over who gets Marignon's capital. The thing that's good for me in this situation is that I have basically a secured border here. The only way I'm really going to lose from my perspective is if I get attacked by almost all my neighbors at once, or like Ulm attacks me at the same time as Bandarlog attacks me at the same time as I'm fighting Satis. This border is very secured because these guys are basically locked into a war because, one of the things I was saying earlier was that in a perfect game, people would switch alliances very quickly to kind of knock the game leader down. And at this point, it's between me and Ulm, but because Scaleria is a much stronger nation than Ulm, it's me. The reason they can't do that is because they're effectively locked into a conflict that neither one of them wants to give up. Neither one of them wants to give up this capital. Right? If it were anything else, if it were something that was easier for them to come to an agreement about, like just a normal province, then they would probably be able to end it, and then everybody should say, let's kill Scaleria, but they can't. So we're talking about truth and lies, and how does that play into this interaction? Well, the messages, and I don't know if I have it on this turn, the messages I've been sending to Bandarlog have been, hey, I've got a few dudes in my border, I'm going to protect this throne province from Ryla, but in general, as I generate troops, I'm going to move them away from this border, but I'm just going to keep some here. But they're not going to attack you. We have a NAP 3. I just want you to be confirmed. And I'm telling him this like some version of it every 2 or 3 turns. Because nobody likes having a ton of dudes on their border. And that is the only... And I'm trying to kind of shuttle troops out. You don't see really any troop movement this turn. But I'm kind of trying to shuttle troops out so I don't get too much of a build-up. But anyway, doing that is going to help keep them entangled in this. If... Like, let's say I attacked Bandarlog, he would give up this fort. He would say, okay, I can't do it, I just need to survive against Scaleria, and then mission not accomplished. And while I have a lot of undead, they would die pretty quickly I would need a big army with mages, and right now I don't want to commit that to this side of the Empire. I would rather just have my guys researching, hitting other objectives, and if I fight Bandarlog, I'll do it later. But I think in this game I don't really fight Bandarlog. Maybe I do at the very, very end. Okay, am I lying here? No, I'm not going to attack him. That's not a lie. But I'm kind of manipulating his view of the game state that, okay, I'm safe, I don't have to be attacked by Scaleria, which is true, so that he can pursue his objectives, which in this case are taking Marignon's capital. And once he does that and secures peace with the Ashdod, things will be fine. Meanwhile, I might be telling stories to Ulm about, I might be telling stories to Abyssia about how strong Ulm is and about how we have to do something. And I'm not lying. Ulm is super strong. Their research is probably twice mine, or maybe not twice, maybe like 30% more than mine, maybe more. They're bigger than me, all these things. And Ulm is definitely a big concern for Abyssia, but I'm also a big concern for Abyssia. So I'm not saying I'm not a concern, because that would be lying. And if I said I'm not a concern, then I'm going to lose trust. And that's not something you want to do. But you just want to make sure, don't lie about your part of the story. Make sure other players definitely know the other parts of the story which are beneficial for the way you want them to perceive the game state. So I'm not going to be able to convince Abyssia that I'm not a threat. But I can make sure Abyssia at least is aware of how big of a threat Ulm is. And that's kind of the basics of good diplomacy. It's not really a lie. I'm not lying, because I'm not saying I'm not a threat. I'm just saying, Ulm's also a big threat. This is kind of what I mean by lying, telling the truth, when you should do what. You don't want to lie outright most of the time. Most of the time, what you want to do is alter how players think about their game state. Like, I'm altering how Bandarlog is thinking about their game state. Like, this is not something they need to be worried about, so that they can do something which is going to be in my interest, which is, not mess with me, try to get land, and mess with Ashdod, who's also actually a big nation at this point. Ashdod's, I think, this big? Anyway, not having to deal with all that is really good. And these guys are fighting. There's a bunch of good things that are happening for me diplomatically. And like the fact that all this is happening is really good for me because it means people aren't ganging up on me. And I'm very quickly passing the point where I think anybody can do anything about me this game. And a lot of nations aren't like this. Scaleria is just a nation that you have to deal with them in a timely fashion. Otherwise, I don't think you can handle them. Like, even with a strong coalition. I have a much better build in this game than I took in the Scaleria series I'm uploading. I think if you take a bad Scaleria build, you can deal with them, but that's not really the purpose of this. So, anyway, this is only turn 34. And I'm much more out of control in this game than in the Scaleria game that I uploaded. And that's because I have a better build. But anyway, and that's the build I talked about in the Pretender Design section for that series. So anyway, it's accessible to you. Back to diplomacy. We've talked about lies, and the final thing I'll say on lies is that even things which are subtle, like I could say, oh, I just lost the big battle against Cetis, it's going to be slower than I thought, and that might help control what people think about me, and maybe we don't need to attack Scaleria quite as soon. That might be true. I did probably lose a battle against Cetis right here. But the thing is the truth is going to come out eventually. You need to be very careful about any lies you tell, or like deceptions you tell, because if they're big and obvious, you're going to lose credibility. Ultimately, the truth is going to come out. Like, if you were stomping through a nation and eating them, you're not going to be able to hide that from people. You can delay people knowing about it about a turn or two, but you're not going to hide it. Like, it's going to come out. I typically will tell the truth about most things, and kind of the way you look at it, too. If you mix in some subtle deceptions, like maybe you downplay how fast you're eating a nation, if you mix that in with a bunch of other useful information, then it's much more likely that that deception gets consumed. But if you're not talking to anybody, you're not sharing with them any useful information, and then all of a sudden you say, hey, I just lost a big battle to Scaleria, when to them it looked like you were kind of winning against them. I mean, to Cetis, to them it looked like you were winning against them. They're not really going to believe you. You're not going to get much for that little deception. But if you're sharing with people different people's blesses, and you're sharing with them when you win a battle, or something like that, and then you mix in, oh god, I just lost this one, it's going to be slower than I thought, then it will actually get consumed by people as, okay, maybe things are going to take slower. And if you actually did lose a battle, and there's some truth to what you're saying, then all the better. It's a very dangerous territory you start walking into in diplomacy if you start outright lying. Because there's a million ways where people will eventually find out. That's kind of it online. Now, should you trust another player? That's another question. When should we trust? Well, there's a few things to consider. Obviously, have they told the truth in the past? Next, actions speak louder than words. So if people tell you they're being, like, for me, I'm telling Bandarlog I'm going to be friendly with him, but I'm building up a fair amount of troops on his border. Now, if he saw, like, a 600-person army, which is a proper Scalarian army, like, 100's not really proper. If he saw that 600-person army, then that would be cause for concern that anything I said should not really dispel it. Like, here, this army's trapped by the mountains, so it's not really on his border, it's protecting a throne. I've got reasonably small armies here, and I send him repeated assurances from dating a long time back that I followed up on by not attacking him. I'm saying they're just here. Right? I've got little undead generation factories, and it's going to fight big bad somebody else. So repeated assurances will go a long way, but ultimately look at their actions, right? Like if I've betrayed you in the past, don't trust me. If I'm building up an army on your border, think about that a lot harder than what I say. Now, if I say I'm not going to attack you or we have a nap, me as a player, I'm going to honor that, but not everybody will. And 3 is only 3 turns. So if somebody's building up an army on your border, I mean, Bandarlog and I in this case don't fight almost all game. But if somebody's building up an army on your border, then definitely pay attention to that. A lot of times that's going to be a better indicator of what they're going to do than maybe what they're telling you. Especially if they're silent. If they're silent, then that's all you should look at, is where their army movements are. The other final thing about trusting people is a lot of times people will say, oh, we had a nap, and then I'm going to completely evacuate my border. The thing is, what I have found is the degree to which I can trust people to stay in a non-aggression pact or to not break that pact is based on how costly violating it looks like. So if I keep an army on a flank where I have a non-aggression pact, it should be a safe border. It's much less likely. It's kind of like what I'm doing over here with Bandarlog. It's safe, but what are the odds that Bandarlog is going to attack me? I wouldn't want to attack into this. Tons of forts with skeletons in it. No, thank you. So it makes... Now, if these were empty forts with no skeletons in it, because I did a perfect job of bringing all my skeletons out every turn, you might say, that looks like some tasty territory. But as it stands, this doesn't look very tasty. It looks like it would be an expensive war for him. And he wouldn't do it without a big coalition attacking me. And meanwhile, he's got other things to do. So, having at least one big army on a flank, or one medium-sized army on a flank that could potentially be reinforced, will go a long way to keeping your partners quote-unquote honest. We are now blending very heavily into tips and tricks to be good at diplomacy. So I'm going to get now into a few more tips. One tip is see the world through your opponent's eyes. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, each player has diplomatic relations with every other player. Each player has a perception of who their nation lines up well against and who it is weak against. Each player has their own perspective on who are the strongest, largest powers in the world and who are the weakest powers. And then each player has a position on you, whether you're trustworthy, whether you're big, whether you're small, whether you're an early game threat, whether you're a late game threat. And if you understand all these different perspectives from all the other players, it's much easier to do diplomacy. You may say, well, I don't know, what they're thinking. Well, in that case, just ask them. That's one of the best things that people don't do a lot in diplomacy, is just ask the other person what they're thinking. Who do they think is big? Who are they worried about in the late game? A lot of times I'll just tell you, even if that person's you. Yeah, I'm really worried about you. And you'd be like, yeah, I'm a little scary, right? I mean, you don't have to lie with them. And you'd be like, yeah, I'm worried about me too, but I'm also really worried about Ulm. Or something like that. So, but having a good understanding of what players are thinking is going to go a long way to allowing you to negotiate quickly with them, and then also as to what they're going to do. Because ultimately in the medium run, people are going to do what's in their best interest, or they're going to go after the game leader. So even if it's you, it's good to know that. The other thing is, while sometimes it can be good to be emotional, or at least feign being emotional, like seeking vengeance or anything like that, don't let it blind you from a good deal. A lot of times, maybe somebody pissed you off and you're in a war with them. That war may be more costly. It may not be. It may be costing you more than it's worth. And a lot of times, getting stuck in a bad war or a costly war, even if ultimately you're going to win, can be the difference between winning and losing a game. Be flexible. If people, like in this, these guys are going to have a conflict. They're going to fight over Marignon's capital. Who's going to get it? It's not even going to matter because I'm going to win the game. So they need to cooperate and take me down. Now, part of that is, I think at the time, I've done a lot to just within the Discord chat and stuff to kind of popularize how strong this nation is. So I think it's more acknowledged now. They're just like Airmore, though a lot of people already probably knew that. Anyway, yeah, they should totally all be ganging up on me. So, but they're a little blinded by the current situation to recognize that no matter who wins, they're both going to lose unless they come down here and figure out how to mess with me. The other thing, too, is if you're a nation that can control scouts a lot, like I'm patrolling everywhere, people don't really know how nasty you are because you're killing so many of their scouts. So that's another good way to kind of control the diplomacy, is to prevent people from really knowing things. More on diplomacy. There's two more things we're going to talk about. How do you get into a good war? And then how do you get out of a bad war? We're going to start with getting out of a bad war. The most important thing, in fact, the most important thing by a long stretch of getting out of a bad war is you need to make it militarily expensive for your opponent. Or expensive. It could be diplomatically expensive. You need to make it very expensive for your opponent, ideally militarily. If you are not able to make it militarily expensive, then there's no reason that they don't have to just gobble up as much land of yours as they can very quickly. And other players, when they look at you, let's say your military is depleted, you did an all-in, and your military got busted. If your army's wiped out, you might say, well, I can call to help for other neighbors. Well, let me tell you what's going to happen 9 times out of 10. If your military gets wiped out or you get pinned up in your cap, everybody else isn't going to look at you as something to save or something which is, they're going to, oh, we're going to come help you and we're going to fight this big mean player that's eating you. They're going to look at it as, oh crap, I have to get 3 of your provinces really quickly before so-and-so gobbles it all up. Your ability to get cooperation from allies is largely based on you having a large military, and your ability to get whoever's attacking you to stop is also based on having a large military. Or even if it's not large, you have to be able to inflict very significant damage. So sometimes you can do that with small armies or thugs or super combatants, even when most of your other stuff is gone. Maybe just your pretender god. But your ability to do that is going to be one of your most important tools to get out of a battle. Some ways to think about this are, even if you're not winning, if you make it very, very expensive for them to fight you, then what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to increase their commitment to their war with you. They're going to have to add more troops. Like, Satis is doing a pretty good job, but I've just got so many resources. But imagine I had to pull all my troops over here and I left this whole portion of my empire basically empty. Well, if I do that, then Satis is going to have a much easier job recruiting other people to attack me, right? But if he's just folding, if everything's dying, and I'm not even having to commit that much, then I'm not going to look juicy to anybody else. Which is kind of what's happening. Like, he needs to put up enough of a fight that I have to be like, pull every skeleton because I need to win this war. The second I start doing that, if these were all emptied lands and I had no armies here, I would start looking very appetizing to my neighbors. So that is a huge part of making it expensive for other people to attack you, is that by pulling all their troops to have to the more you force them into an all-in to get your stuff, the better you can do at attracting allies. The other way to get out of a bad war, like sometimes this is especially relevant if you're a big player and you're getting triple teamed, is sometimes you just need to strategically give land away. And you say, look, I know you're a middle-sized player, you want to be one of the big ones. The thing is, I know you think I'm a big threat as Scalaria because I've got a bunch of undead. But really, Ulm's the bigger threat. He's probably twice my research. He's going to be doing all sorts of nasty things. So I tell you what, you're attacking me. I know I'm going to eventually lose, but the second you take some of my land, it's going to be you and me versus Ulm, who's about to win. So let's skip the army trading part, and let's just go fight Ulm. I know that if we do it in our current thing, then it's just going to be me winning if you help me fight Ulm. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you these 4 pieces of land, man. I'm going to give these to you. They're yours. You get this 1 fort. Part of this, I want a nap, and I want at least, some indication from you that we're going to go attack Ulm. Right? Or something like that. And often shedding things that you're kind of going to lose anyway, especially if you think that other player might join you once they get bigger and you get smaller, and attacking another big player, that can be a very successful strategy. So knowing when to shed land can be really big. Now, if you're small and you shed land because somebody's attacking you, really you're just delaying the inevitable. Because if you're small and you shed land, then you're going to start getting farther and farther behind. So the only times you want to really do that when you're small is if you just need a few turns. Like maybe you say, hey, look, I know I've got a big army in my cap. I'm going to come out and kill your stuff. And I know you need some land, but you can take all my stuff. Just don't take my cap circle, and we can be friends, and I'll help you in some war to come. That can be a good way to prevent you from getting kind of stomped. But you're now this really small, insignificant power. What are you going to do? Well, you better have a trick up your sleeve where in 3 or 4 turns your pretender's coming, and then you can fight back and take your stuff back, or you can make up all the lands you lost by going in against another player nearby or something like that. But you need to have some kind of trick, usually if you're small, where you kind of accept throwing off some territory. Yeah. So the other way to get out of a bad war is to unbalance a coalition. If people are attacking you, if you give asymmetrical outcomes to the people, you can kind of break the coalition. So if one person's going to have to bear all the cost of the war while the other person is going to get all the rewards, then very quickly it will start falling apart, but not always. So anyway, that's one way to do it. But again, there you need to advertise that if you want people to actually get it. And then finally, another way to get out of a bad war is if, like, let's say these guys are fighting and one of them wants out. They just say, hey, look, we're fighting, but the real enemy is Scaleria or Ulm. Picking out who the enemy should be is a great way to get out of a bad war. How do you choose your war? Well, there's a few things to think about when you're choosing a war. These are the wars you should be in. You need to think about who are the good matchups for you in the early, mid, and late game. If you have somebody who's a good matchup for you in the early game, but a bad matchup for you in the late game, then you want to maybe attack them early, right? If it's somebody that's a bad matchup for you all game, then maybe you think about, like, let's say I thought Pangea was a bad matchup for me all game. I think about, okay, I never want to fight Pangea, but maybe Pangea has two neighbors, and those two neighbors are a good matchup against Pangea. So, like, let's say Man and Abyssio were good matchups. Then I can convince them to go in a coalition against Pangea, and that will help take them out. And this is something that's more applicable in the early part of the game, but it's applicable at all times. But anyway, so that's one thing to think about, is helping other players recognize who they're good against, especially in the case where that person that they're good against is somebody that's good against you. So that is another part. The next thing I want to talk about is coalitions. And this is one of the things that, and I'm kind of a little, I wish it wasn't the end of the video I was bringing it up. There's a few things new players tend to do, which one of the things is just never attack unless you're in a coalition. And it's this idea of we're only going to dogpile people and we'll move from one dogpile to the next. Yeah, okay, I've done this once or twice in a game where it's like, okay, let's try to form a big coalition. The first time I try it, it turns around, completely bites me in the ass, and I lose. Because the coalition turns around on me, because whatever, and I got trounced. In general, big coalitions are dangerous weapons. They can turn on you as quick as you had it turned on somebody else. But let's talk about, that aside, when you want to use a coalition and when you don't. If you are a very strong 1v1 matchup versus somebody, and y'all are of equal size, let's say, and you're just a good matchup for their nation, a lot of times you do not want a coalition, right? And the reason is because a coalition is going to dilute your spoils. You're going to get less from what you conquer. Let's say you end up doing the heavy lifting and fighting most of the armies, and then you get only 30 or 40% of the land. That's a time you don't want to join a coalition. The time you do want to join a coalition is when it's against the game leader, right? So if there's a very clear game leader, nobody's going to be able to 1v1 them. You need to form a coalition to take them down, and doing that's going to help balance out the game state. There's other times you don't want to form a coalition. Another time you do not want to form a coalition is when the person you're allying with is going to be able to raid, which is how you take lots of land quickly, and siege down forts, which is how you get infrastructure, much faster than you will. So if the other player, like Scaleria is great at both. Scaleria is great at raiding, and it's great at breaking forts. So any war I enter into with a coalition, I am going to probably outraid every other member of the coalition in that war, and I'm also going to break through forts faster. So that while, like Marignon's going to, Bandarlog's going to sit here on top of this fort for 7 turns trying to take it. If I were to commit to taking this fort, I would take it in 1 turn, or 2 turns. I'd sit on it, I'd immediately break it, and then I'd take it. If you don't have a lot of sieging power or raiding power, then you need to be very careful about entering into a coalition, because you may end up bearing a large part of the military cost because you have a big doomstack moving through that could get wiped out. But you're going to get a disproportionately small amount of the shares of the spoils. So that is definitely something to consider. And you also want to think about who you're in the coalition with. If you're in the coalition with like the number 2 and y'all are all going after the number 1, especially if the number 2 is going to get a bigger portion of the spoils than you will, then you need to be very careful. Like maybe you say, I'm going to get these provinces with the number 2 and you can raid the other ones, but don't come in these or the coalition's immediately broken. Because you need to be very careful about enabling other people to win through joining a coalition which you're going to get a small portion of the spoils for. So in general, just some final thoughts on coalitions is coalitions are a good tool to balance the game state out and to take care of the game leader and to keep you in the game. They can be a good tool if you have a lot of raiding and sieging power, because you're usually going to be the beneficiary in a coalition. But like even that said, there was a coalition early against Falegra in this particular game, and I did all the work. I fought all the armies, but because I had a very small border with Phalegra, I did hardly any of the raiding, and I got a very small amount of the spoils. Ulm, on the other hand, he got Phalegra's capital, he got most of Phalegra's land, and he didn't even fight any Philegran armies. And that was because he had a bigger border, and Phalegra had already forward positioned his armies to fight me. And I wasn't even big or scary at the time. Anyway, those are all things to think about. The other thing, Phalegra didn't do a great job with diplomacy, because he started attacking Satis and me without having a secure border with Ulm. And he probably could have made peace with me or Satis, maybe, if Ulm was attacking him, and then he could have dealt with them. But instead, he just madly attacked us. Okay, and the final thing we're going to talk about, and then we'll do closing thoughts, is scouting and intelligence. So aside from military intel, okay, you're going to get scouting and intelligence from two things. You're going to get scouting intelligence from your actual scouts in provinces where you can see battles, and you're also going to get it from talking to players. And the more players you talk to and the more scouts you have out, the more info you're going to get, and you'll get more info on the same thing, so you can tell when people are lying. So like one person may say, oh, I'm barely winning the war, and then you have scouts out and it shows, no, you're like dramatically winning the war. Right? But if you're totally forced to trust what one person's saying, then you're at a bit of a loss. But if you're talking with 3 people, you can get 3 reports of a war, and if 2 out of 3 are saying one thing and 1 out of 3 saying something else, well, you probably trust the 2 out of 3. Or if somebody's an independent source and they're not biased, then you can trust them. But this is how scouting and otherwise kind of just general diplo communication about what's going on is how you validate when other people are telling you the truth and when they're manipulating your perspective of the game state. Like, they may be trying to make you think, oh, you should be scared of Ulm, but really you should be scared of Scaleria. Now, the best way people can figure that out is if they have scouts over here and they're watching me eat Scaleria. If they don't see that, like if they don't have scouts in this region, like you can see there's huge portions of this map, I don't have any scouts, so things could be happening, I don't know. Right? But if they have scouts in this region, then they'll know. Otherwise, they might just say, well, like, Man might not have scouts down here, and he may say, oh, same border over here, I don't see Scaleria being aggressive, I don't see a ton of troops. I may not look very threatening to Man if he doesn't have scouts. If Man's talking to Abyssia, who can see all of this, and he's talking to Satis, who can see all this, he'll get this report and he'll know that, okay, maybe Scaleria is something we need to worry about. Having kind of a good sense of the game state is really important, and you can do that through scouting or through communications, or both. So that has kind of covered diplomacy. I hope we went through most of the things. I hope this has given you a good sense for maybe how to do diplomacy a little better in upcoming games. And most importantly, I hope it has made diplomacy more fun for you, and that you'll be less salty when things don't necessarily go your way. And by understanding the game better, you'll be able to make things go your way a little better in the future, just because you understand it. So anyway, thanks for watching, and see you next time.